April 1994. Diana was searching for Harry's vaccination records in the Palace Medical Archive when she found a locked filing cabinet labeled Royal Genetic Screening Protocol, Confidential. Inside were decades of genetic test results for every royal baby born since 1948. William's file, Harry's file, Charles's file, even the Queen's. The palace had been secretly testing every royal infant for specific genetic markers, and what they were screening for would explain everything about how the royal family really worked. Diana hadn't intended to discover anything. She'd simply needed Harry's vaccination records for his school enrollment forms. The palace medical office had told her the records were in the archive room at Buckingham Palace, and she could access them herself during a scheduled visit. The archive room was in a basement corridor Diana had never seen before. It was temperature-controlled, meticulously organized, with rows of filing cabinets containing decades of royal medical records. A young clerk named Sarah showed her to the section containing pediatric vaccination records. "The children's files are alphabetically organized by first name," Sarah explained. "Prince Harry should be in this cabinet. I'll leave you to find what you need. Just close the door when you're finished." Diana began searching through the neatly labeled folders. She found William's file easily: comprehensive vaccination records, growth charts, pediatric checkup notes. But Harry's file wasn't where it should have been alphabetically. She checked the neighboring drawers, thinking perhaps it had been misfiled. That's when she noticed the locked filing cabinet at the end of the row. It was different from the others, newer, with a more sophisticated lock, and bearing a label that made her pause. Royal Genetic Screening Protocol, Confidential, Authorized Personnel Only. Diana's curiosity was immediate. Why would genetic screening records be separate from regular medical files? Why locked? Why authorized personnel only? She tried the handle. Locked, as expected. She was about to leave when she noticed something: the key cabinet on the wall near the door. It held dozens of small keys for various filing cabinets, each labeled with a number. Diana checked the number on the locked cabinet, RGS 1948. She found the corresponding key. Her hands trembled slightly as she unlocked the cabinet. Inside were dozens of thick folders, each labeled with a name, birth date, and a series of codes Diana didn't immediately understand. She pulled out the first folder: Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, DOB, 21st April, 1926, genetic profile, screening conducted retrospectively, 1948. Diana's heart began racing. This was the Queen's file. She opened it carefully. The first document was titled Royal Genetic Screening Protocol, Implementation 1948. It was signed by King George VI and several palace physicians. Diana read the introduction with growing shock. Following advances in genetic science during wartime research, the royal medical household has determined that systematic genetic screening of the royal bloodline is necessary to ensure the continuation of suitable hereditary traits. All living members of the direct line of succession shall undergo genetic analysis. All future births shall be screened within 24 hours. Results shall be classified and accessible only to senior palace medical staff and the monarch. Diana turned the page. The document outlined specific genetic markers being tested: hereditary diseases, blood disorders, genetic conditions associated with mental instability, physical abnormalities, and, most disturbingly, markers associated with temperament unsuitable for royal duties. The Queen's file showed she'd been tested in 1948 when she was 22 years old, shortly before Charles's birth. Her genetic profile was marked suitable, no concerning markers identified. Diana set down the Queen's file and found Charles's. Charles Philip Arthur George, DOB, 14th November 1948, genetic profile, screening conducted 16th November 1948. Charles had been tested 2 days after birth. Diana read through his genetic analysis with growing understanding. The report noted several markers. Hereditary markers for porphyria identified, clinically manageable. Markers for emotional regulation difficulties identified, psychological intervention recommended. Overall assessment, suitable for succession with ongoing medical monitoring. This explained so much. The palace had known from birth that Charles carried genetic markers for emotional difficulties. They'd known and had decided these markers were suitable enough to allow him to remain in the line of succession. Diana's hands were shaking now as she searched for her son's files. She found William's first. William Arthur Philip Lewis, DOB, 21st June 1982, genetic profile, screening conducted 22 June 1982. She'd had no idea William had been tested. No one had asked her permission. No one had told her results. She'd been recovering from childbirth while palace doctors took her newborn son and analyzed his DNA without her knowledge or consent. William's genetic profile was marked optimal, no concerning markers, excellent hereditary traits for royal duties. Temperament markers suggest strong leadership capacity and emotional stability. Then Diana found Harry's file. Henry Charles Albert David, DOB, 15th of September 1984. Genetic profile screening conducted 16 September 1984. Harry's results were different. Hereditary Porphyria markers identified, paternal inheritance confirmed. Temperament markers suggest emotional sensitivity and reduce conformity to traditional authority structures. Physical presentation markers indicate reddish hair coloration. Assessment: suitable for secondary succession position. Primary succession not recommended due to temperamental markers. Diana read that last line 3 times. Primary succession not recommended. They'd tested her 2-day-old baby and decided he wasn't suitable to be king. Not because of health issues, because of temperamental markers that suggested he wouldn't conform well to traditional authority structures. They'd been testing royal babies for personality traits. They'd been using genetic screening to determine not just health, but suitability for royal duties based on predicted temperament. Diana felt sick. Her sons had been genetically profiled within hours of birth, categorized and assessed for their potential value to the institution, all without her knowledge. She kept reading through the files. There were dozens of them. Princess Anne's file showed suitable markers. Prince Andrew's showed some concerning markers, but acceptable for succession. Prince Edward's showed optimal temperamental markers for supporting royal duties. But then Diana found files that confused her, names she didn't recognize. James Alexander, DOB, 12th of March, 1952, genetic profile, multiple concerning markers. Status: removed from succession consideration. Current location: redacted. Margaret Sarah, DOB, 3 August 1957, genetic profile, severe hereditary markers for mental instability. Status: removed from line. Current location: private care facility, Scotland. Diana felt cold. There were royal babies who'd been tested, found unsuitable, and removed. Hidden. Placed in private care facilities. Erased from the official line of succession. She found more. David Michael, DOB, 1959. Status: adopted out to non-royal family due to genetic unsuitability. Elizabeth Jane, DOB, 1963. Status: raised outside royal household due to concerning developmental markers. The palace had been using genetic testing to curate the royal bloodline. They'd been removing babies who didn't meet their genetic standards, quietly placing them outside the royal family, pretending they'd never existed. Diana photographed every page she could with the small camera she kept in her purse. She worked quickly, aware that someone might check on her at any moment. She documented William's file, Harry's file, the protocol documents, and the files of the removed children. After an hour, she carefully returned everything to the cabinet, locked it, and replaced the key. She found Harry's vaccination records in a different cabinet. They'd been misfiled, and left the archive room as if nothing had happened. But everything had happened. Diana now knew that the palace had been conducting genetic screening on royal babies for nearly 50 years. They'd been testing not just for health issues, but for personality traits, temperament, suitability for royal duties, and they'd been removing children who failed their genetic standards. Over the next week, Diana contacted Dr. Sarah Mitchell, her trusted private physician. "Sarah, I need you to look at something. I need to understand what these genetic markers actually mean." She showed Dr. Mitchell copies of the genetic screening documents. Sarah's face grew increasingly troubled as she read. "Diana, these aren't standard genetic health screenings. These are personality trait predictions based on genetic markers. The science behind this is highly controversial and largely unproven. You can't actually predict someone's personality or leadership ability from genetic markers with any reliability." "But the palace has been making succession decisions based on these tests for 50 years. Then they've been making decisions based on pseudoscience. Yes, you can test for hereditary diseases and some physical traits. But temperament, leadership capacity, conformity to authority, those aren't genetically determined in any way we can currently test for. This is eugenics dressed up as medical screening. Diana felt her anger building. They tested my sons without my permission. They made assessments about Harry's suitability as a future king based on genetic markers that you're telling me don't actually predict what they claim to predict. Worse than that, Diana, look at these files of removed children. If the palace has been taking babies away from their families because they failed genetic testing based on pseudoscience, that's not just unethical, it's criminal. Diana made a decision. She needed to confront the palace about this, but carefully. She couldn't reveal how she'd found the information without admitting she'd broken into locked files. She needed a different approach. She requested a meeting with Dr. Anthony Whitmore, the head of the royal medical household, under the pretense of discussing Harry's medical care. Dr. Whitmore, I'd like to review Harry's complete medical file, all records from birth forward. Of course, Your Royal Highness. I can have those sent to your secretary. I'd like the complete file, including any genetic testing that was performed. Dr. Whitmore's expression shifted slightly. Standard genetic screening for hereditary conditions was performed, as is routine. What conditions were you screening for? The usual hereditary disorders, blood conditions, metabolic disorders. Just health conditions? Nothing else? What else would we be screening for? Diana leaned forward. Temperament markers, personality traits, suitability for royal duties. Those kinds of things. The color drained from Dr. Whitmore's face. I don't know what you're referring to. Don't you? Because I've become aware that the palace conducts comprehensive genetic screening on all royal babies. Screening that goes far beyond health issues. Screening that's used to make succession decisions. Your Royal Highness, I think you've been misinformed. Have I? Because I'd very much like to see the royal genetic screening protocol documents, the ones that outline exactly what you test for and why. Dr. Whitmore stood up. Those documents, if they exist, would be classified medical research, not accessible to the mother of the children being tested, Diana interrupted. Dr. Whitmore, my sons were genetically screened without my knowledge or consent. I want to know what you tested for, what you found, and what assessments you made about their suitability for royal duties based on genetic markers. I need to consult with senior palace officials before I can discuss this further. You do that. And while you're consulting, I want you to know that I'm consulting with lawyers about parental consent for genetic testing of minors. I'm very interested to learn whether what you've been doing is actually legal. Within 2 days, Diana received a visit from Sir Robert Fellows, the Queen's private secretary. Diana, we need to discuss your recent inquiries about medical records. You mean the genetic screening program you've been running for 50 years without informing parents or obtaining proper consent? The genetic screening protocol is a confidential medical program designed to protect the health of the royal family. It's a eugenics program designed to curate the royal bloodline based on pseudoscientific personality predictions, and I have evidence that children have been removed from families because they failed your genetic standards. Sir Robert was quiet for a long moment. What do you want? I want the program stopped. I want genetic screening limited to actual health conditions, not personality predictions. I want proper informed consent from parents before any testing, and I want to know what happened to the children who were removed. That's not possible. The program is essential for what? For playing God with children's lives based on genetic markers that don't actually predict what you claim they predict? Dr. Whitmore tested my sons for conformity to authority and temperament suitable for royal duties. That's not medical science, that's institutional control. Diana, if you go public with this, I won't. Not if you make the changes I'm demanding. But if I ever discover that any child is being removed from a family, or that any parent isn't being fully informed about genetic testing being performed on their baby, I'll release every document I have. And believe me, I have copies. The genetic screening protocol was quietly modified within 6 months. The program was restricted to testing for legitimate hereditary health conditions. The personality and temperament assessments were discontinued. Parents began receiving full disclosure about genetic testing being performed on their children. The children who'd been removed were never publicly acknowledged, but several distant cousins mysteriously appeared in peripheral royal family events over the following years. Adults who bore striking resemblances to senior royals, but whose existence had never been officially explained. Diana never went public with the genetic screening documents, but she kept copies in multiple secure locations with instructions that if anything happened to her, they should be released. Years after Diana's death, some of those documents did leak. Medical ethicists confirmed that the palace had indeed been conducting genetic screening that went far beyond health testing. The personality trait predictions were condemned as pseudoscience. Several families came forward claiming their children had been taken and hidden because of genetic test results. The palace never officially acknowledged the full extent of the genetic screening program, but reforms were implemented. Modern genetic testing of royal babies is now limited to legitimate health screening, with full parental consent and disclosure. Diana's discovery in that archive room had exposed one of the palace's darkest secrets. For 50 years, they'd been using genetic testing to control the royal bloodline, making succession decisions based on pseudoscience and removing children who didn't meet their standards. Sometimes the most shocking discoveries happen by accident. Diana had just been looking for vaccination records. Instead, she'd found evidence that the institution she'd married into had been treating royal babies like a breeding program, testing and categorizing them within hours of birth, deciding their value to the family based on genetic markers that predicted nothing but gave the palace the illusion of control over hereditary royalty. The locked filing cabinet had contained the truth. Royal babies weren't just born into the family. They were genetically screened, assessed, categorized, and sometimes removed. And until Diana found those files, no one outside the palace medical staff had known it was happening.